Chapter 187. Engaging with the unexpected was different that day. They'd made the shift from talking about superhero case studies to discussing personal experiences during the disaster. Most people were more serious than usual, and there was a reduction in the amount of arguing as everyone took time to listen to specific stories. It was an appropriate change, but not without its downsides. While there were fewer arguments, the ones that started up were more likely to result in lasting hard feelings than the normal discussion topics. A few students seemed genuinely tense talking to each other, and Instructor Marion was being more proactive about directing conversations than usual. And there was another change that Alden, who was partially distracted by imagining Bo on his way to look for the lost kid, didn't notice until halfway through class. At that point, Maria, the adjuster girl with the summoning spells, was saying she felt that the class's focus on responding well to unexpected events was useful, but that they'd missed out on having conversations about how to handle the aftermath of those events. We've been talking about dealing with problems that appear suddenly, but we haven't been talking about how you can be stuck with days and days of more unexpected things because the first problem brute kicked you so hard you still haven't come down. Getting woken up by sirens and sitting in a classroom in the MPE building, realizing that the news was talking about my neighborhood being underwater, that sucked. But I still think everything after it, combined, has been harder for me than that night. This morning my mom called to ask me how I'd feel about her moving to an avowed zone instead of getting a new place here on Nzidora. That's not a bad thing, is it? I'm 18. I don't need her to live here. But it's something she's only thinking of because of recent events, and it's really unexpected. And it's the 10th confusing thing I've had to deal with over the past few days. They are not catastrophes, but they just keep coming. I'm starting to wish I could hibernate for a year. I'd wake up and find out about all the unexpected stuff at the same time instead of getting hit with a little more every day. Alden raised his hand. He was going to agree with her that talking about this kind of thing was a good idea. The class had been lacking on that front, and he felt like people tended to underestimate the way trouble could breed more trouble. As soon as his hand lifted into the air, a dozen seats creaked in unison as people turned to stare at him. The few who hadn't noticed he had something to say joined the stare as the second Instructor Marion called on him. He had already started speaking before he realized why the atmosphere felt strange. Normally, a lot of people looked at you when you were called on, but not the entire class. Even the girl who was constantly typing on her tablet looked like she was hanging on his every word. Kind of intimidating. Maybe Instructor Marion gave them a lecture on paying attention to each other while I was gone Monday. He stumbled for a second over what he was saying, then kept on with it. Sometimes when someone says, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," I want to ask them if they really believe that or if they are just saying it because it sounds encouraging on the surface. It's possible for handling a difficult situation to make you stronger, but we don't have to pretend like it's a guarantee. A lot of the stuff that doesn't kill you wears you down instead. Everyone else who started in the same place as you before the trouble happened runs ahead of you in so many ways while you're trying to put yourself back together. Maybe you do put yourself back together, and you catch up. Maybe you even pass them. But that can take you years, and you can miss out on being stable and happy for those years, never mind being stronger. He was done speaking, but they were all still staring at him. And that's all I had to say. That's really deep. The speaker was 3-Minute Man. Alden was still neglecting to learn his name because the guy never referred to him as anything but the B rank or the rabbit. He waited, expecting a follow-up remark about how it was really deep for a weakling who couldn't defeat all the world's villains single-handedly, but the dude was just nodding like he thought Alden was deep. "Thanks," Alden said finally. Maria brought up the point first. "I was just adding on." "No, you said it better," said Maria. Several of them were smiling and agreeing. That was a nice interaction, Alden thought as Instructor Marion started talking about how Part 2 of this class next quarter would address problems like this. It seems like a weird way for the disaster to have changed them all, but I don't mind it. After that, he started paying more attention to how focused everyone was when someone else was speaking. A couple of kids were more popular, It was possible to pick them out even though Alden didn't know these people outside of this class. They got more eyes and more smiles whenever they said something. Nobody else was getting the super hard group stare, though. It's only me? He thought, after instructor Marion asked him if he was ready to share any of his experiences from that night, and everyone tried to stab him with their eyeballs again. He talked about being on the bridge, and how interesting it was to look back on it and think about the different ways all the people there had responded to trouble. Most students had been on campus when everything went down, so the class being genuinely curious about the situation on the span made sense. They were behaving this way already, though. And a few of them seemed really happy to see me when I walked into the room. "Hi, Alden. Great to have you back. Where have you been? We missed you so much." They are usually in a good mood when class starts, but not like that. Figuring out what might be responsible for his new aura of friendability and deepness took just a second more once he'd had that thought. Thanksgiving. Assurity. The commendation. Or mostly the commendation. I don't think they'd have decided I was deep just because Winston announced I was going to be Assurdy's professional octagon waxer. He spent the rest of the period trying to decide how uncomfortable he was with this new dynamic and how long it would last. It's so much better than it could be, he thought as he packed away his laptop at the end of class. And the glow is bound to fade since I'm not committing acts of bravery in the absence of obligation every morning before breakfast. Plus I'm doing well in gym for a B rank, so if they get their hands on footage of me, maybe most of them will think like Hoyu and Lexi. Maybe I was worried about nothing after all. Class was over, and nobody had run over to demand answers from him or challenge him to a duel to prove he deserved a star beside his name. Feels good. Now, I could go to her tone and conversation next. Kelly seems like a much cooler instructor, and it would be fun. But since it's optional, and Lute's not there, and I'm very aware of how much extra time I don't have right now to take care of all my business, Hey, Andre. 3-Minute Man called from across the room as he lifted his backpack onto his shoulder. You bees are lucky you got a good one this cycle. After that stunt the rest of you pulled, people were saying they should finally clip you all out of the program. He made a scissor motion with his fingers, then pointed at Alden. Your man there might have saved you. So he's still a dick. The instructor had left the room less than a minute ago, and apparently that was a signal for 3-Minute to get a dig in. Andre had just picked up his cudgel. He looked like he wanted to put it down again on top of the other boy's head. Not every B rank left school that night. Not even half of us. And there were A's. And an S. Yes, but the S could get out on her own. The rest of you, I was in the gym. So you say. Principal Celeste spoke to me there. Alden still didn't even know which B's other than BB, Francis, and Ella Clara had been involved, and getting into it with this particular person seemed like a direct route to a stupid fight. Should I use my temporary social power for good? He tried to think of what a deep person would say. He wasn't really feeling it, though. You guys, this is a time for us to have each other's backs as Anasidorans, about human beings. Chilean and North students. That was likely the weakest of the options. To make matters worse, Andre and 3-Minute both looked like they were waiting for him to say more, even though that had been the whole speech. So let's do our best to get along and show everyone that this school is full of mature people who know not to cause a ruckus. Did I just say ruckus? Do people actually say that in real life? Maybe they'll think it's an American thing. During a time of trouble. He had no idea why he sounded so much dumber when he'd been trying to sound wiser than usual. Maybe wisdom couldn't be forced. 3-Minute nodded. You're right, Alden. That's deep. Really? He's going to be like that no matter what I say? Alden's mouth opened. In the end, he decided it was better not to let more words fall out of it, and he left wondering if other people were going to be this strange. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Skipping our tone and conversation, Ivy gave Alden almost 3 hours before his next class. He could think of a dozen activities to cram into that amount of time. Normally, he might have had trouble prioritizing, But the mood he was in after reading the emails from Chicago was one that made setting aside some things easier. He would not be aiming himself at his old home, even though it seemed like he had a chance to do so. If he found his way back there in the future, it wouldn't be because he had fought for it now. This was the obvious thing to give up, considering where he was and what he had on his plate, but at the same time, it was such a huge thing to give up that he felt like he'd shed about a third of himself and dropped it behind him in the dust. The lighter, rawer person who walked onward wasn't interested in worrying about the science lecture he'd failed to watch this morning. He jogged back to the dorms, and waved at Hoyu, who was at his desk watching a recorded lecture on a tablet. "Moo," said Hoyu after muting the volume on his teacher. Alden snorted. "Moo to you, too. You're all right? You got the message from Lexi about the commendation news spreading?" "I am, and I did. Thanks for asking. I've only had one class since I got back, and the people in it don't really know me. But it wasn't weird in a bad way. Our class is mostly excited. You weren't here, so everybody has been asking the rest of us about you. I'm sure they'll also be weird in MPE today, but not in a bad way. Except for the obvious people." "Is Mehdi one of the obvious people?" Alden asked. "He was so perky the last time I passed him in the hall, and he said I should come over and hang out. Maybe it's because he beat you in duels. He had bunny phobia, and that cured it. I'm curious to see if it will come back if you beat him. I don't know how to feel about that. I want you to test my theory." Hoyu was spinning himself in his chair. "What if you can turn Niece Mehdi on and off like a light switch just by dueling him?" "The ultimate superpower," Alden said. "If it works, we'll have to give it a skill name." He left Hoyu working there and went to change into exercise clothes. One quick, magic-enhanced run later he was entering North of North. He walked past signs advertising boxing classes and something called a hazelnut energy nugget, and headed for the woman in the green pants who he recognized as an employee and knower of useful things. As soon as he started explaining what kinds of equipment and services he was hoping to find, she told him that Bobby was in, and the trainer didn't currently have anyone else on her schedule. Lucky, he thought, pondering the flavor of the energy nugget sample he'd been given as he headed toward her office. The door was already open when he arrived, and she waved him in. Her short gray hair was gelled up in an almost mohawk. That wasn't her normal style, but before Alden could comment on it, he was distracted by the wads of tissue sticking out of her nose. "Are you okay? Someone didn't listen to my instructions about how to use the landslide feature on the climbing wall. They are no longer my client, so things are looking up." She grinned at him. "What have you got going on today?" "No class right now. I'm free. There are a couple of new training goals I have. I'm sure the gym has options that will help me practice, but I wanted to talk about what they were. Hopefully I can get a good session in before I have to leave today." "Exciting." Bobby pulled the tissue out of her nose and tossed it with unerring precision at a wastebasket beneath a Super Olympics poster. "I'd love to help you figure it out." "What are the goals?" Alden didn't know how this was going to sound, so he hesitated for a second. "I would prefer the goals themselves not be public." Bobby crossed her heart. "I'll forget them as soon as I've made you a training plan." "I appreciate that. I need to practice lifting a heavy vehicle with my skill, and I think reaction speed training definitely, and a couple more things that would help me kill a specific kind of demon." Bobby blinked. "I'm not really going to kill a demon," Alden said. "It's an exercise for my mental health." "What is the demon like?" she asked slowly. Alden considered giving her an entire breakdown of a book of demons' hypothetical abilities, then he realized how long that would take. "To start with, I just need to be able to consistently get my shield in front of a big, quick, dangerous thing that can behave in unpredictable ways." "How big?" "About the size of a rhinoceros." She looked like she was thinking about it. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," said Alden. "I'm very sure." "All right. For lifting cars, I'll need to make sure you have some safety in place. But reaction speed is something you can work on right now." She raised a hand to start typing on her interface. "Let me see which training rooms are available, and we'll get you into one. Line of asterisks. Well, this hasn't been a standard morning. I'll give it that. Bo Lupescu was working down a road that was so low on traffic Alden hadn't seen a single car since he turned the call from audio to video about 3 minutes ago. Behind his friend, he could see a rusted water tower rising above a warehouse. "You're sure I'm not distracting you? You've spent most of the past hour grunting, cursing, and panting," Bo replied. It wasn't the most melodic soundtrack I've ever listened to, but it didn't require a lot of engagement on my part either. Alden sat in a molded plastic chair in his own private training room, having a brief break and a drink of water. Soon, he would figure out exactly what tools he'd be using in the dream, and he'd bring the closest equivalent he could find here with him. For now, he was still getting the hang of the room Bobby had introduced him to, and using a towel he'd brought along as his shield was working fine. When he stood in the center of the room, a holographic humanoid figure, because whoever had made this place didn't anticipate avowed wanting to be attacked by an alien herd creature, ran at him. He'd get his shield in front of it, and it would try to slip around. There was no feeling of impact. This definitely wasn't the Magiffi's gym. But it was good for practicing what Alden had wanted to today. Getting a wall of magic in between his body and something dangerous was basic. He didn't have to save it for MPE. The room provided a constant readout of his successes and failures. When he was on a good shielding streak, the hologram attacks sped up. When he was failing, they slowed down. Bobby was going to ask somebody about getting a more backup-like attacker for him for next time. Bo adjusted his scarf and then shoved his hands back into the pockets of his jacket. Alden watched him turn off the street toward a brick building. Tracks ran beside it, and an old steam engine rested there. That's not the kind of train you see every day. This is a rail museum according to a sign over there. I don't know why the kid would have come this far. Especially not when it's freezing. But I looked like a suspicious character wandering around too close to the other searchers. Nobody from this town knows me, and this is the kind of place where I bet they care about that. What are you going to do if you succeed in your mission? Alden asked, suddenly realizing there was a problem with that. You can't take him back home without everyone wanting to know who you are. If I find him, I'll tell him pythons eat little kids who scare their parents as bad as his are scared, and I'll point him toward his street. Alden shook his head. Your persona needs some work. Your persona is doomed forever if you sing songs with Sharon, Bo said. I heard her popularity is on the rise. Bo shivered. Go back to your workout. Nothing exciting is going on here, and I'm a little. He tilted his head. Alden leaned forward in his seat. What is it? SHHHH. Alden shut his mouth. Plans to return to his practice evaporated as he watched Bo's frown deepen. He watched as Bo turned toward the steam engine, walked past it, and hopped a fence to head toward a line of orange rail cars on another track. The kid he was looking for was only 6? It was frigid. He'd been gone from home for hours. What are the chances he made it miles away on his own? What if he's been kidnapped? Or he's freezing to death? What if something really horrible has happened, and Bo's about to have to deal with it? Be careful, Alden whispered. Bo was walking more purposefully now. And moments later, he was standing behind a caboose, looking down on a scene that left both him and Alden temporarily speechless. Alden recovered his voice first, but he had a hard time getting words out around his laughter. Don't be mad at him. Look how much thought he's put into it. The child and Bo were still staring at each other. The boy had brown eyes. Not much more of his face was visible, since he was bundled up in what had to be half of the winter wear in his family's house. And he was trying to cook a can of English peas on top of a mound of disposable hand warmers. The whole unopened can, label and all. Are you David? Said Bo. Which Alden found extra funny, because how many 6-year-old runaways could there be in one town? David nodded. He didn't even start a real fire, Alden said. He just wanted to go camping. Or escape on a train. One or the other. Let him off easy. Bo sighed and bent down. You need to go home. Your mom and dad are very worried about you. He was talking in a kind, soft voice. "I'll walk with you to your street, and then you just go straight down the sidewalk until you see someone." David grabbed his peas and held them protectively to his stomach. "I can't talk to you," he said in a severe tone. "You're a stranger." "Listen," said Bo, "let me tell you about pythons." Line of asterisks. Alden whipped around, shield up to meet a faceless attacker. Bo was watching him silently from the back seat of a rideshare. It wasn't a fair trade as far as entertainment value went. Watching Bo persuade a stubborn outdoorsman to take his peas, his 24 hand warmers, and himself back to the house they all belonged in went beyond mere amusement into the realms of treasured memory. Alden was just a guy, learning to respond a little more quickly to incoming threats. The hologram jumped, and he lifted the shield. It dove, and he lowered it. Having it get faster and faster when he was successful at blocking was good feedback, and it helped him fall into the activity better. When his time ran out, he stood breathing hard, and raised his eyebrows at Bo. "Good job. You taught that imaginary guy to fear the power of a rabbit with a towel. And you taught a child that pythons migrate to Illinois in the winter. Now you see why some of us aren't meant to be heroes." "No," said Alden. "You did good." Bo rolled his eyes. "You did good, asshole," Alden said firmly. "I just wish you were here, on Anzidora, so that I could tell you that in person. I really wish that. So damn much." Chapter 188. A large cargo delivery drone shaped like a helicopter headed toward the eastern tip of the apex crescent, following the flight path that had been assigned over a landscape marked with evidence of both ruin and recovery. As it approached Sinjao Beach, most signs of human habitation below it disappeared. Land was being readied for new construction, but for now, the one neighborhood that had been untouched by the disaster stood by itself. From the drone's altitude, the town square at the center of it was a vibrant green postage stamp, surrounded by dollhouses. The manufacturing facilities, the workshops, and the community center around the perimeter were all whole as well. Gamma Nu Theta Iota Sigma Alpha Upsilon Tau Omicron Nu was written on the roof of the largest building, irrelevant to the drone but a source of curiosity for human viewers. The letters stood out like a legible, three-dimensional marble sculpture from every angle. The drone began its descent, and at the sound of its approach, the only person currently enjoying the square looked up. She was a gaunt young woman, kneeling beside a chubby golden retriever so that she could rub his belly. Droplets from the Pythos fountain near her splattered her heavy coat and crocheted hat. Her eyes followed the drone as it set down at the edge of the square. The dog showed no interest, but he whined a little when her hand stopped rubbing. She went back to it, ignoring the delivery, and a couple of minutes later, the door of one of the picturesque townhouses opened. The informant, with a jovial expression on his bearded face, came down the stairs and crossed the street at a stroll. He was wearing slacks and a light, red sweater. He took the time to remove his shoes and socks so that he could walk across the grass barefoot. Then, he spoke to the woman for almost 15 minutes, not glancing even once at the drone, though her own eyes turned to it curiously a few times. Finally, he nodded, complimented her on her hat, and headed to fetch the package that had arrived. When the cargo drone's door slid aside for him, a single wooden crate was revealed. The informant pulled it out and shook it, something the average non-avowed wouldn't have been able to do given its size. The muffled thump of something heavy moving around within it could be heard. His smile widened, and he shook it a few more times. "Handle with care" was stamped in white letters on the side. On the short way back to his house, he managed to flip the crate twice, and once, he sat down on top of it to have a lengthy discussion with one of the current residents of his neighborhood. The right had a question about the feasibility of purchasing a component for his latest project from Futuna avowed, instead of trying to have it crafted by one of his fellow Anisidorans. "Everything is possible," the informant replied in Mandarin. "I'll make sure you receive what you need." He watched his employee head down the street, then lifted the crate again and carried it up the front steps into his house. He placed it in the sitting room beside a dog bed that was same shade of olive as the low sofa and almost as large. Then he knocked on the lid a few times and waited. The crate rocked sideways. with a crack and shriek of protest from the lid and the metal tabs that failed to hold it in place. A woman stood up as gracefully as if she hadn't just splintered plywood with the top of her dark blonde head. She was wearing a torso-hugging, long-sleeved black shirt and leggings. Her own smile was unperturbed as it met her host's. "Elias. It's been too long since you've had me over, so I invited myself. I hope you don't mind?" "Of course not." He offered her a hand as she stepped from the crate. "I've already ordered a coffee cake for us." "That sounds perfect," said Elias. "I haven't had a decent meal since I loaned my chef to Matadero." All in black, Elias noted as Elias' boat shoes touched the edge of a pale wool rug. "You're showing off too much of your stunning figure to be in mourning. Have you come to burgle? Is there still a 10 million gold prize for stealing from you without being caught?" "Always." She stepped over to the sofa and sat down, letting her arms stretch outward along the back. "Did you have to shake my little traveling box so much? Did you have to arrive by crate?" He countered. "I haven't heard that you're wanted by the law. In the official sense. I didn't want to be filmed on my way to see you. Or joined by anyone. Or publicly invited for a sit-down with any of the people who would so like to have a little talk with me just so that they can make implications about me with a pinch more credibility." She sighed and let her head fall back to stare up at a metal light fixture made up of vaguely floral shapes that opened and closed one by one. "Elias, I've found nothing. I told you that you would find nothing." He took a seat on the opposite end of the sofa and angled himself to face her. "If you weren't you, I would be stunned that you thought you could hunt for information better than the people who've already looked. Did you think the system was lying? Or even if you did you think I was?" She cut her eyes toward him. "I'm hiding nothing about the submerger from the rest of you. Why would I?" he said mildly. "Maybe for the Artonans," she said. "Maybe," he agreed, "if they asked. But they haven't. And I've asked 1,000 questions 1,000 ways, standing at the fountain. A boat left in Zedora full of people. Those people wanted different things from the trip. None of those things were the immediate destruction of Matadero. We're missing something. Life itself happens because coincidences line up." Her lips pursed. "You don't really think it was an accident either?" "I think there must have been an accident or two along the way, because if it was a conspiracy to attack us, it must have been a very complicated one, and very complicated conspiracies have flaws." His fingers drummed against the front of the armrest. "But I also think that the origins of a few of the coincidences are suspiciously obscure." "Yes." Elias straightened. "Who told Orpheus to take the submerger from Libra? Who told him how to do it?" "That's one of the suspiciously obscure points," Elias agreed. "But my friend here," he lifted a finger and made a circling gesture with it to indicate the neighborhood around them, "can't find a culprit for the theft beyond Orpheus. From what we can see and hear, it looks like he came up with the idea himself. That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard in my life. He isn't a mastermind. He couldn't even break into the area where it was stored. He's tried before because he knows there are things of value in there, but he tries with as much effort as he puts into everything else. He rattles knobs and bangs on walls with his fists for a couple of minutes, then he goes away to look through all the first aid kits so he can guzzle the potions inside them. Like usual. That doesn't change the fact that every question I ask in that direction has no conclusion other than him. My records show he went to sleep one night in New Sabaris with a woman who later complained to a friend wearing an Infigera watch that he'd hired her for the whole evening and failed to give her the word chain he'd promised. He was probably too high to figure it out, Elias bet. He enjoys having no self-control. I swear I think he... Never mind. What next? Next, he woke up in the mood to sell your submerger for some drugs and with the knowledge he needed to do it. As far as I can prove, anyway. He grinned. So far. She made a sound of disgust. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Archie accuses me of the same thing. Yes, I admit that puzzling over a problem of this magnitude is fun. There's no harm in appreciating the moves of an opponent. Or an imaginary opponent if a chain reaction of bizarre occurrences really is all we ever find. Alaya chewed on her lower lip for a second and then released it. A sway could have put the idea in his head while he slept. Sure, Elias agreed. And the contracts wouldn't have revealed it to me explicitly. I was asked by the investigators from the true planets to provide detailed intelligence on several people who seemed to have very tenuous connections to the situation. But if you shift the blame from Orpheus to a sway of your choice, you'll still run into the same problem. Why did the sway do it? If they were knowingly part of a serious plan to upset the balance of things on Earth or in Zedora, the contract would be aware of that. Obviously it made a mistake. If it did, we all did, he said. My creation, the system, all the avowed who-knows around looking to stop trouble, and all the wizards, too. Meditate on that while I go make coffee. Our cake is here. He stood and went toward the kitchen. On his way past the front door, he opened it to allow his dog inside. The retriever was wagging his tail and carrying a pink cake box in his mouth by the twine that wrapped it. Elias praised him profusely, then pointed toward Alaya, who was watching with an arched brow. Several minutes later, with cake and coffee in hand and the dog sprawled on his bed, Elias said, "There's a piece of information I'd like for you to confirm." "Gee, how rare. You've said that Orpheus has forgotten most of the thoughts and interactions that led to our current mystery. I assumed that the truth is he never remembered them in the first place? He's fond of trading away his ability to recall information." "Yes," Alaya said bitterly. "Sustaining a few mind-altering chains may be the only contribution he's made to the universe. It means there's nothing there for a mind reader to find. And since the charming Hazel is volunteering on another planet, I haven't been able to watch her behavior. You did read that special letter from her during your update from mission headquarters. But the truth is?" Alaya's mouth twisted. She knew what the device was, and what it did, and what it cost me to obtain it all those years ago. She was having a little pity party for herself, and when she saw what her brother had gotten his hands on, she decided to let him trade it away to punish me and her parents for our failings. There was a pause. "You're sure?" Elias asked. "Yes, I'm sure. Do you think she planned an assault on Anzidora?" "No," said Elias. "She doesn't strike me as someone capable of orchestrating a cool-headed plot that would have involved the careful manipulation of multiple people. I ask because one of the more likely possibilities, in my opinion, is that if there was a scheme, it must have originated with someone who isn't on Earth right now. Or someone who spends long stretches of time away. If you want to hide your intentions from a system, the best way to do it is probably not to be around one too much, or to be around one that knows you less well than your native one." He plucked a walnut from his piece of cake and ate it. "I'm suggesting that someone like that might have whispered an idea or two in Hazel's ear while her ear was off-planet, where a system that was a little less attuned to Earth protection might have found the words unremarkable." He blew on his coffee. Maybe Orpheus stole the submerger because his sister somehow suggested it. Maybe she suggested it because someone she met in the course of her work on the true planets provided a sympathetic ear and put the idea in her head. Alaya was frowning deeply. Elias shrugged. "With no answers, I've fallen back on imagining ways it could be done. This is just one of several possibilities I came up with. Our contract doesn't know everything, but it can usually find out what it thinks it needs to know. If someone were going to play a trick on it, I think they might want to do it by using another person with innocent, or innocent enough, intentions who didn't realize they'd become the Trojan horse." Alaya ate and drank, staring off into space for a while. "No," she said finally. "You don't think it would work?" "It might, but not with Hazel. I know the people she regularly interacts with on the true planets. None of them would want to do this, and none of them would understand everything they would need to about human nature in order to make deliberate attacks on Matadero through such convoluted methods. Hazel was only an example of a possible avenue. One I wanted to cross off my personal list. Do you think I could?" "What do you want me to do, implant one of your keys in her hip so you can hear every word she says?" "That would show real commitment to your cause as Zedora's protector," he said brightly. Alaya frowned. "I'll bring her to you for discussion. You can use light detection methods. She does owe you a favor." "Surprisingly few people have queried about Manambar," he said. and all of them have reason to assume that the lock-on information about her was purchased by her. A hazard of her personality type. What were you thinking when you hired her? Alaya didn't answer. Did she even acquire anything worthwhile for you, or was it a few interesting baubles, a few insights? Less than I hoped, she said in a brusque voice. I came here to barter for your services. Do tell. I want to question people. Which people? Alaya stared at him. All of them. Anyone who we know was involved. At the rate this is going, I'll have little choice but to cast blame on Sile. You have the choice not to do that. After all, you're not sure they are to blame. They are not innocent. That was a sizable bomb they had with them. He fixed his attention on his cake. I think some of our old friends are still around, she continued, waiting to see if the latest generation is going to be useful enough to them for them to kick off a war between humans and Avowed. So you're going to poke them in the eye. Make sure you get the first strike in. Elias shook his head. I wish I could persuade you to slow down, Alaya. You're one to talk. I remember when, it's been half a lifetime and then some, he interrupted, since I learned to let go of ambitions that might destroy what I've already built and what I love. She looked away from him and stood, going over to peer through a gap in the curtains toward the square. After a while, she said, I hear them all effervescing about what you've built here. Oh, the informant is someone even the Artonans turn to for help. His Fajir came through for us even when the system couldn't. I'm getting more credit than I should for that. Cutting non-essential communication was such an exciting decision for it to make. It threw an unexpected wrench in the works for any schemes that might have relied on its services, altered everyone's behavior, reduced the number of authority figures trying to weigh in, and forced everyone to feed you more words about the trouble. Alaya's eyes were on the fountain. Behind her, still on the sofa, Elias shrugged. Violating the privacy of millions of humans and Avowed to help the Artonans investigate would have been very expensive for the system, if it had to do it by itself. So it created a scenario that provided plenty of intel to a much cheaper source. Do you know how many times someone said the word Matadero within reach of one of my keys at night? How many people specifically asked what had happened there through Infligir? I've never gotten such crystal clear reception for a targeted question before. Just between the two of us, I've got a complete recording of what was said in the Oval Office during the first 10 minutes I spent scanning. Good for you. Thank you. But I still haven't found satisfactory answers, and the information grows more muddled every day. Alaya walked back over to join him. Use your skill. Let me talk to some members of Sile, whoever was in contact with the captain. I know you must know who that was by now. That's a waste of my time and yours, Elias replied. I activate the keys. I make a phantasm of some unregistered Avowed for you to talk to. And whatever they tell you might be true or not. The flip of a coin. Remember, I'm not widespread beyond Enzidora. Any unregistered smart enough to arrange for your own great-grandson to steal from you is smart enough not to be around in Fajir unless they are trying to get my attention or send misinformation. Then let me speak to the captain of the boat and the one who killed him. The teenagers. All of them who were on board. He blinked at her. How many keys with unadulterated records of those people do you think I have left? And it's not necessary. The Artonans interviewed the phantasms of all of them in the aftermath. And I did my own investigating. I'm much too close to burning out the keys I've set aside, and I might want to ask my own questions of them in the future. You can speak to the versions of them I've stored in them. I don't want to talk to a machine that thinks it knows how a person would behave. I want to speak to your skill, your gift, to magic. He set aside his half-drunk coffee and rubbed a hand over his chin, like he was considering something. Alaya's lips tipped upwards. No, Elias said. She started to protest. No, he said, because I have very methodical approaches to talking to the phantasms. Questions are carefully planned in advance so not a single moment is wasted. You'll ask them whatever your gut instinct and your faith tells you to in the moment. I know you think I'm some kind of woo-woo woman, she said after a beat. Yes, but you're my favorite woo-woo woman. However, I haven't been doing badly blazing my own path forward. I'm sure you'll agree. The past year hasn't been your finest, he said delicately. Growing pains from a few family members proving more of a bother than expected. In a few years, they'll all laugh about it. His voice was dry. Make peace with it and learn that most of their dissatisfactions are their own faults, not mine, she said. At least let me talk to the one who bought the submerger. Jacob Moore. My connection to Orpheus may prompt the universe to reveal something. No. And this time it's not just because I'm saving keys for my own future use. I can tell what kind of mood you're in, and I know you're not asking me to use my skill through MBF. I still can't believe you changed its name. He shrugged. MBF decided it didn't like being called the All-Seeker. Or anything else I came up with. And unless I'm mistaken and you came today to ask me to use my skill in the normal way, then you and I have no path to an agreement about this. Alaya crossed her arms over her chest and sat back, staring him down. Her neutral expression was marred only by the rapid tapping of an index finger against her own elbow. I'm more patient than you are now, Elias said eventually. You might as well say what you want to instead of having a staring contest with me. If you were as patient as you think, you wouldn't have spoken first, she said, her voice turning irritable. Elias, that skill has been costly for you. I know that. But you used to revel in it anyway. This new normal way isn't normal at all. If you don't want to be the mouthpiece, I'll get you someone else. A human being, not a right work thing you cooked up with the help of however many about it took, all of whom are too young to have ever seen you use your own keys correctly. Now you're being sadly purist. I've had just a few summoners in the past 3 decades who insisted on the original, less informative method, and they were so ancient and boring that I think you'd be embarrassed to be in their company. Filter the spirits of the dead. They are not spirits. Through me, then, said Alaya, exasperated. I consent. I will be magic's vessel, its outlet, your muse. Surely that's not immoral to you? For the first time since her arrival, he looked shocked. It is actually. And what do you think that will gain you? How will you interview the dead if you're the one speaking for them? I'll get a feel for who they really were. Like you used to. I'm confident in my ability to remain uninfluenced. I think I know myself well and, he crossed his own arms and smiled at her, but something in his eyes stopped her from continuing her attempt to convince him. Ask again, he said, and I'll refuse to answer every information request you send my way for. I think until the newest Vulra rank agrees to have his eye replaced. Based on what MBF has observed of him, that should be between 2054 and the end of time. Lute isn't that stubborn, she said slowly. He's young. And unprepared for the reality of his position thanks to his mother. Let's see if my friend's guess is better than your natural gut instinct about your own family. We only have to wait 14 years. A bump on our timelines. The tension in the room increased until the dog whined and rose to lay his head on Elias's knee. Alaya watched the two of them with her jaw clenched for a minute longer, then groaned and slumped, a hand coming up to cover her eyes. I didn't come here to annoy you, Elias. Really, I didn't. That's a shame, he said, giving the dog a thorough scratch behind the ears before reaching over for his coffee cup again. If anyone was bold enough to annoy me just for the sake of it, it would be you. Some other time maybe. Today, I hoped you'd give me the answers I wanted, and then we'd sneak into a closet to screw each other silly and plot against the guards and talk about learning everything there is to know about magic. He laughed so explosively that the last sip of his drink almost escaped from the cup. Don't laugh at me. I've had a couple of bad weeks. Just when I'm about to tell you again to slow down and be reasonable, you remind me that I'd miss you if you did, he said. She let her hand slide off her face and hit the cushion she sat on. I know it's been a while. But you'd tell me, wouldn't you? If you'd solved the riddle and found the way to the next stage. About wizardry, I know the same things you do, he said, unless you're hiding wonderful secrets. She shook her head. That we know almost everything there is to know, Alaya. And at the same time, absolutely nothing. I prefer to focus on a subject where I have the advantage these days. Avowed talents are such fantastic things. A good skill in the hands of a good user has potential that even the Artonans can't always anticipate. Isn't that worth studying? Yes, she muttered. After I've found a way to talk to the universe like they do. You might have been born without a voice. A voice might not even be the thing you're searching for. If the Artonans looked like foxes, mantis shrimp, or puddles of slime, would you be so eager to find a sense within yourself that matched one of theirs? If it would give me access to all that magic can do, I would. She was staring up at the light fixture again. I've always thought it was meant to be me. My rank, of course. My sense for magic even more so. And my position within the palace. Most knowledgeable people would consider that one a major handicap. I did once. You remember. But I've worked my way in, and our place at the palace will protect me when the time comes. When I finally cross the threshold. It all lines up. I'm always almost there. I won't argue with you about this. I learned better last time. Who else could do it? She asked. My willingness to make sacrifices. All my years of striving. Even if someone is out there with natural talent and power, how likely are they to have chased this as ardently as me? I'll find it. Nobody else could be so close. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden thanked Cappuccino Girl, who kept looking around the crowded coffee shop like she suspected a certain knight might have come along with him this afternoon, and accepted the iced hibiscus tea he'd ordered. He's not here today, he said as she passed him a straw. As far as I know. She laughed. Sorry. He was nice though, right? Isn't he? She was speaking quietly. Very, Alden agreed. If he comes back, I was thinking you and you might be good for him. I make a great one. Should I tell him you hope he comes back? No. Greater than God. Of course not. I meant just in case. Okay. Take your tea. Next customer. Not you, Rosalind, I can tell you're just going to stare at the menu for 5 more minutes. Guy who always orders oat milk with caramel and hazelnut, it's your turn. Alden got out of the way and headed to Garden Hall, noticing how more eyes than usual turned toward him and more whispers seemed to follow in his wake. Nobody's talking about my radish drop anymore, he thought. But Thanksgiving is catching a lot of mentions. More than it should have been maybe. He'd left the Nomagon parked at the dorm, hoping that walking around with everyone else would be a plenty thing to do. Especially since the campus was a sea of school uniforms now. But people he didn't recognize at all kept coming up to him to say, "Hey, it's you. How about that? Thanksgiving? Great holiday. Welcome to Chelena North." Most of them didn't mention the commendation at all. The few who did, inevitably said something that made him mildly uncomfortable, but it wasn't like they were being terrible. Nobody's been too rude. There's just a lot of badly disguised curiosity. Maybe I should stop being surprised most people have self-control in person. Real life isn't as bad as the internet, thankfully. To keep himself from watching all the people who were watching him, he focused on his preserved burden. Sorry, Vandy, he thought, peeking at the edge of a golden spiral of enchantment that was just visible to him if he looked under the cuff of his jacket sleeve. He'd pulled it from a temper sphere he'd gotten Bobby to entrust to him before leaving North of North. This isn't one you could have spotted no matter how thoroughly you check my pockets. He'd caught her studying him more than once during Intro to Other Worlds. The good thing about carrying around the invisibility enchantment for the afternoon was that he could tire his skill by an appropriate amount before the start of gym class. The double preservation practice he usually did was effective, but it was too tempting, sometimes, to drop it and push for just a little more when gym was exciting. And since he'd been forewarned by Principal Sleyca that they had something interesting going on today, a shadow passing over him made him look up to see a flying platform of a different, slower kind than the Nomagon. Ground Shaper. Shapers often flew around campus at heights that he now knew were low enough to keep them from getting in trouble for flying without a license. This one was drifting past on a compressed disk of soil, with a passenger. Alden recognized them after only a couple of seconds. Maricel. And Marcia? He hadn't caught more than a glimpse of Maricel Alcantara over the past days, not in person at least. He'd seen more of her on the news, though, usually accompanied by Fragment and doing clean-up work. When he'd passed through the Garden Hall common area earlier, the television had been turned to a channel that was showing a clip of her meeting with her whole family at a magic conference table that made it look like they were all sitting together in the same room instead of being a world apart. He'd watched briefly while they talked about how proud they were of her. It had looked like a heartwarming, happy meeting, but the careful orchestration of it made it feel just a little off. Now there she was, focused on her shaping to keep her dirt compressed and aloft, both hands in motion while Marcia stood beside her chatting cheerfully. Alden thought he caught the phrase, more like superlatives finally. But whatever it was Marcia was comparing to the school's S-rank club, he didn't know. Thinking it might be good to catch up to Maricel and talk to her for a minute, just to resolve lingering worries for both of them, he sped up. He intended to catch her before she went into the dorm. Hopefully apart from Marcia. She'd probably like to know that I'm not going to contradict the image that's being built for her, right? And I'd like to make sure my name doesn't come up in some half-truth connected to Jacob and the other people on that boat. Even Maricel saying something honest like, and when I found out Jacob was running away, the only person I told other than the teachers and Skycia was Alden Thorne, in an interview could land him somewhere even weirder than he was now. He seriously disliked the idea of being rebranded as a model globie who encouraged other new avowed to love Anzidora as much as he did, for the good of humanity, superhumanity, and peace on Earth. That seemed to be the direction they were going with Maricel's protective, or corrective, new image. It doesn't seem that likely to happen since nobody has pushed me that way yet. Being Thanksgiving guy and General Escherty's favorite commended moon rabbit probably makes it hard to slap another label on me. Right? But being Mr. Good and Lawful Globie Citizen would be a problem. Mainly because he didn't think the right way to fit into that mold. Lying about it would be. And not lying about it would land trouble on me. He didn't get a chance to talk to Maricel, though. He arrived in time to see Marcia jump off the dirt disc from 2 stories up and land easily on the sidewalk that led into her dorm. Before her feet hit the ground, Maricel had risen, picked up speed, and headed for Chilena Circle. Alden glanced at the Nonagon part on the roof above his room. He started to lift the finger with a ring on it, then stopped. Chasing her down wouldn't be subtle. He shot her a text instead, saying he'd like to talk when she wasn't too busy. When she didn't text back right away, he turned and went through the automatic doors. In the common area, a first-year student from one of the other acceptance cycles waved at him from a table, beaming like they knew each other. Maybe we do? I met like 100 new people during the Thanksgiving madness. They've blurred together. Before he could be captured and socialized with, he waved back, leaped toward the staircase, and hurried up to his apartment. He seemed to have the place to himself, and this time block before gym was supposed to be his study hall. During study hall, he thought, slurping the bright, acidic tea through the straw and then raising his cup to acknowledge the polar bear watching him from the end of the hall, we get to study magic. He stepped into his room and closed the door behind him. Alden couldn't yet hold in enchantment and give his undivided attention to a spell he was trying to figure out, especially not if he wore the earring or if there was a risk of setting the building on fire. And his skill was pretty fatigued already. So he let the Temper Sphere invisibility enchantment go, by pulling it off his arm and laying it on top of his cup. Which disappeared. Oh. It's better than I expected, he thought, blinking in surprise. He'd guessed it would be a very weak camouflaging effect. Definitely something worse than he'd gotten when he tried it out on Victor's fuzzy ball cat toy, because that had been an appropriately sized sphere. But this was an improvement. The cup and the tea inside it were invisible except for the place where the words Café Forthright were stamped on the side. The words looked like they were floating there, and so did the top half of the yellow straw where it stuck out of the cup lid. He pulled the straw out curiously, and found that he could see his drink through the hole left in the invisible lid. Fascinated and more excited than he had been during previous similar experiments, he watched the seconds on his interface clock tick by. At 50, There was a discernible cup-shaped something in his hand, and by 52, it was back to normal. He stuck the straw back in and took a victory sip, thinking about why it had worked better. He swallowed. "Transparency," he said to the smiling wombat that stood on the cheaper of the two learning cushions in the room. "Possibly transparent containers specifically? That's what the cup has in common with a tempersphere. Glassish ball that held glitter sand. Plastic cup that held tea. My ponchos are clear plastic. Clear plastic body containers. A lot bigger than a cup, though. I wonder if temperspheres come in sizes." He set his cup on the desk and dropped his bag on the rolling chair. Then, he changed out of his uniform and into a t-shirt for comfort. A system requested his spell book appearing beside the T at the same time as his Oriot slipped down his biceps, over his elbow, and across his forearm into his fingers. "The nights on Thegund last forever," he said, taking his place beside the stuffed animal that was the first toy his parents had bought him in Chicago, and the last. He opened Wantel's to his living leaf bookmark, wondered for the dozenth time if he should try rooting it in a cup of water or a pot of dirt instead of using it as a page marker, and looked down at the flashlight spell he'd modified the other night when he woke from the dream about going to fetch the car. The Kpfs have this bioluminescent drool that helps them see each other and everything else just well enough to get by. Very weird. Good for them. I don't have that, so. He held the Oriot up and wove his fingers into it in the starting position. Around him, reality felt almost attentive. He thought he was imagining that, but he liked imagining it. He, himself, stretched in a way. It was as if after a day of being quiet and staying in his spot and playing only within the rules that formed the folds and corners of his skill, he was finally moving to claim something new. Call the memory of light toward the symbol of the lantern. Carefully this time. Controlled. Focused. Let's do some magic. Chapter 189. When was it that I lit a promise stick for the first time? Early April, in the vault with Kibby, during that stretch of days right after he'd figured out how to deliberately move his authority to return her pat. She'd been so ecstatic for a while there. Finally, a real learning partner, doing his sincere best. The same thing the other little wizards in Gwenlore's classroom had. And Alton had been so freshly aware of, and fascinated with, himself that they'd devoured Gwenlore's videos together and practiced until they couldn't anymore, every single session. A spark at the tips of his fingers, the first flicker on the end of the stick, the smell of it burning. April, May, June, July, August, September, October. And here he was now at the end of November, holding an Oriot and casting sunlight. This is sunlight. A rectangular shaft of it shone in front of his Oriot, like the release pattern he'd chosen was a window cracked open between here and some brighter place. He knew he should experiment a little before he wore himself out or his focus shifted in some detrimental way, but he kept kneeling there on his cushion, staring through the Oriot at the motes of dust swirling in response to his own breath and at the bright shape he was casting on the back of his desk chair. His pleasure at commanding reality was present, but at the moment, it was taking a surprising backseat to an emotion he hadn't expected to hit him quite like this, at a time like this. I couldn't do anything. I didn't know anything. And now I'm here. That was a thought he wanted to take with him to the inward path. He wanted to examine it in that calmer, unhurried way that the path and Yenupesth made possible. He swallowed and moved his arms, still holding his Oriot out with his fingers stretched in the release pattern, making the shaft of light travel back and forth, up and down. While casting the spell, he had focused on calling the same light that would fill the room if his curtain wasn't shut to block it. And he knew he'd done it. The overhead lighting had a cold bluish cast to it. What he'd brought into the room by magic was just a little warmer. If Kibby doesn't learn this spell from Delatorni or her new school, I'd like to teach it to her. A want that wasn't very reasonable. When would there be an opportunity for him to do a thing like that in this better time when they were both in better places instead of being stuck together in the vault where Odin had studied demons? It was a genuine wish anyway. He held his new spell for as long as he could. It was easier to keep going than it had been to get it going in the first place, and he found room to think about other things without losing control of it. Nothing too complicated, just what he felt and what he wished, and idle thoughts drifting past. 8 months. Who will I be in 8 more? He gave the last several minutes of his sunlight to the leaf from Rapuri before he sent it away with his book, grabbed his duffel bag, and headed to gym class. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. 8 years, said Olive, dragging a brush through her light brown hair one last time before pulling an elastic tie from around the handle. Her voice was mostly lost among all the others in the girls' locker room. Her gray unitard was already on, with the wrist and ankle cuffs waiting on top of her gym bag on a bench in front of her. 3 of high school, 4 of uni. Then 1 for job hunting and brand building and whatever else you need to improve about yourself if you didn't finish it up before graduation. That's a long time from now. I plan to finish in 6, said Jupiter. She was still in her school uniform, sitting beside Olive's bag and eating from a family-sized package of shrimp crackers. That's not my point, Olive said. My point is, it's that years from now, everything will be different. The people who are doing well today may not be keeping up as well then. I'm sure the school thinks about all of that when they are evaluating us. A slower start doesn't mean someone. I'm here. Did you all miss me? Astrid's voice sang out as she burst through the door. Her blonde hair, usually kept short, hung down past her waist today, and even though she was in energetic motion, it was immediately obvious that she was much taller than usual. No. Several voices shouted back. Astrid's dramatic gasp of outrage was cut short as her eyes went wide and she tripped over her own feet. In the process of trying to recover from the uncharacteristic clumsiness, she overcorrected, staggered sideways, and stumbled over one of Everly's sneakers. Look out! Catch her! Astrid. With a yelp, she was suddenly diving headfirst toward Lucille. The strength brute quickly tossed aside a water bottle and extended her arms to help, and then, just as quickly, she drew them back in again so that instead of landing in the soft embrace of a rescuer, Astrid splatted onto the hard floor. She lay there, face down and surrounded by classmates who had frozen in the act of tying shoes, adjusting sports bras, and putting on deodorant. Silence reigned for an instant. "Oh," Astrid said, voice muffled by the floor. 16 centimeters of extra leg might have been too much to try with some of the other things. The girls all burst into laughter, chatter, and attempts to assist. "You hate me, don't you, Lucille?" Astrid asked while Rebecca and Aloysia crouched beside her, alternating between asking if she was all right and commenting on her tiny little feet and giraffe legs. "You were going to save me, and then you were like, no. It's only Astrid. Let her die." "I'm so sorry." I saw it, too," Rebecca agreed. "Attempted murder." Lucille stood there, a blush creeping over her face while they teased her. "That was funny," Everly said. She was applying a potion that came in a tiny spray bottle to the blisters on her heels. Tayet looked like she was going to help, too, but then she didn't. Tayet was checking her dart case. "I didn't want to get in Lucille's way. We have a dire case of multi-hero failure," said Aloysia, tucking into the top of a rollerball antiperspirant like it was a microphone. "Let's ask our victim how she feels about that." Astrid moaned into the rollerball. "That bad? She may not make it, listeners," avowed Lucille. "How will you explain this to your millions of fans?" "I was going to grab her, but then I was afraid of grabbing her too hard. We should practice trust falls." Astrid scrambled onto her feet. "I'll jump at you, and you catch me. Without breaking me. On 3. 1, 2, I think you should all get your suits on first," Vandy said, folding her uniform meekly before placing it in her bag. "There are guests coming to our class today, so we should be even earlier than usual if we can." "Guests?" Astrid asked, knees still bent in preparation for a sprint toward Lucille. "Don't bother," Everly said. "She won't tell us anything but that." "Oh. All right, all right. What were we all gossiping about before Lucille tried to kill me?" "What Alden related while he was on Munthagund. If we should ask one of the guys to ask Shrike to kill people faster." Maybe Ignacio thinks he's being a good sport by slowly stalking weaker people around the dueling blocks, but it's scary. Maricel getting what amounts to days of private lessons with Fragment. It's unfair, and I don't care if everyone thinks I'm a bitch for saying it. Whether Con and Lexi look like that naturally or if their parents lie to them about having them designed. The best kinds of pet for every class. Commendations. And people we know who have them. And if any rabbit has ever gotten one before. I think no. Right? Probably no. Soy sauce and butter being a better rice topping than anything else. Wasabi. Olive was trying to say even if the B ranks are doing better than her and Soren right now, it won't be like that in 8 years. Jupiter. I didn't mean it like that. Why someone from Skycia pulled Jeffy out of remedial math today? Jerry was saying she saw someone who she knows is a Lygian recruiter talking to some S ranks from CNH at a restaurant near campus. The Finwin feud. Wasabi. Once again, said Astrid, I am disappointed in you all. This is the best opportunity we have to plot the defeat of my arch-nemesis Torsten Klein. She started unbuttoning her jacket. Seriously though. Did Skycia really pull Jeffy out of class? Why? Is he okay? Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. In a lot on the edge of campus, behind the University Right workshops, Morrison Waker added a broken washing machine to the junk heap he'd built on top of a trailer, then flicked the machine with a finger that dented its metal side. Anyhow, they're great kids, he said over the loud clang he'd just made. He looked around the side of the washer to see a brute with a trimmed black beard who was trying to fit a tree stump with the roots still on it onto the other side of the pile of garbage. Great find. I'll save that one for Jupiter. She's a life shaper, loves a good tree. Argent Thomas brushed his hands off. Have you got enough? Probably too much. Throwing a whole landfill at our newest group's mean of me, isn't it? He laughed. Nah. They'll love it. Great kids, like I said. Teaching is more fun than I expected it to be, Arjun. I did always enjoy getting to hang out with new about. Morrison, you enjoy hanging out with everyone. They don't even have to be human. That's me, he said with another chuckle. But I thought I'd get tired of talking to teenagers every day. It's cool, though. They've got their own world. Most of them think they're 10 years older than they are, and at the same time, they act like anyone 10 years older than them is a dinosaur who can't possibly understand what they're going through. But they're all working for something, all got something they care about. None of them have decided to settle for less and grow moss yet like too many of us dinosaurs do. You're not exactly a moss grower, Arjun said in a steady voice. Aren't you still pushing through 2 or 3 levels a year like a teenager? Might be. Morrison shrugged. Gets a little lonely when all the people who were in it with you stop wanting to climb higher. Smaller group of peers up here, isn't it? But these kids. I know the school attracts ambitious types. I still get excited. Once in a while, they show you flashes of who they'll be one day. Not so much this brand new bunch, they are still getting their feet underneath them and I'm still learning about who they are. Sometimes, though, in the advanced classes, I get those chills. He looked over the pile on the trailer one more time. All right. I've got to hitch myself to this and haul it over since we're still going easy on the teleportation allotment. You're sure you don't want to come help out? Gonna be a fun one. You'd fit right in. I don't think it would be appropriate to spring myself on a particular one of your students, Arjun said pointedly. Morrison winced. Right. Yeah, I didn't think that all the way through. I was just excited to run into you on campus. Thanks for the help. I hope the talk with your sister is productive. Arjun cracked a smile. Were you going to say fun? Productive and instructive, Morrison said bracingly. She's got guts, and she tries hard. We'd all hate to see her lose her unique take on things. Would you? I would. She just needs to add some more patience and peace into her mix. I'll try, said Arjun. Ella Clara and I have never been close, so I don't think I'll have as much of an influence as Leslie hopes. But I'll try. He was turning to go when Morrison suddenly said, "Wait. Did you hear about Sleyca and the new spell impression?" Argent shook his head. "It's bad, of course," Morrison said, but the words were accompanied by a spreading grin. "National security. Preventing another attack. Lots of people looking like they've egged their own faces. But it's also one of the funniest things I've heard since all of this started." Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden, guess what? Vandy's grandpa came all the way here to school to ask me why I took that spell impression. It turns out Sleyca was talking about which of their members should take it, and they were negotiating with someone about a salary increase, but it was taking a while, and then yesterday the system removed the spell impression because the limit on users was reached. That wasn't my fault, though, because I took it the day before yesterday after Nana and Yesenia said it would be alright. So now Sleyca wants to know if I'd be willing to use it for them sometimes, maybe really soon even, and isn't that great? Alden stood in the doorway of the locker room, blinking as Jeffy's words landed on him. They were being delivered so rapidly that he was getting an impression of enthusiasm and good news without quite understanding what was going on. Vandy's grandpa? Spell. Sleyca. Salary. Jeffy holding both hands up for a high five. Nana. His mohawk is a darker blue than the last time I saw it. He returned the high five because that was the easiest part to respond to. Nice. What are we talking about? I think Mr. Carrison was really impressed I took that spell impression, said Jeffy as Alden slipped by him. I hope he doesn't find out I jumped in the fountain and made Vandy mad at me on the first day we met. I don't think he is impressed. Max was near the door with a foot propped on a bench, putting on the ankle cuffs. I think he's probably embarrassed. It sounds like a communication failure between the High Council and Sleyca. Or between both of them and the Artonans. And Zedora obviously requested a ship locating spell for handling things like runaways. Maybe they were even hoping that they could tell everyone that Sleyca was better equipped to find underwater vessels. And the Artonans obviously delivered the spell. But for some reason, Sleyca didn't have an employee ready to affix it. Either they didn't realize it was coming yet, or it didn't occur to them that it would be limited. Doesn't matter. They made a stupid mistake. I know they are dealing with a lot right now, but that should be mortifying. Alden had finally caught up. Jeffy, you picked the spell impression we talked about on Saturday. You like it? Jeffy beamed and nodded. Good then. I'm glad. Who's Yesenia again? Was she the aqua brute he mentioned being a red halo with? He'd have asked for more details if circumstances had been different, but he needed to change. And there were 20 other guys listening in. It made conversing feel like a performance. At least Winston wasn't here. Alden had spotted the speedster, already in his uniform, running what must have been warm-up laps on the track. They're all looking at me, he thought, glancing around. They probably want to ask questions. He wished someone would go ahead and do it so that he didn't have to think of some kind of tension breaker himself. Maybe I will ask Jeffy who Yesenia is after. So, said Hoyu. Lexi said, quit staring like a bunch of, hey, Alden, said Khan. All three of them had spoken at the same time. Hey, Khan, said Alden, looking across the room to where Khan had just stopped in the act of pulling off a t-shirt. He'd left the neckband wrapped around his forehead so that the light blue fabric draped behind his neck and shoulders like a veil. One of the girls keeps shouting wasabi. Should we yell it back? Or should we yell back pickled ginger instead? Alden felt a smile stealing across his face. I think wasabi would sound better yelled. You're obviously wrong, Khan scoffed. Not as wrong as the lunatic who wanted to moo at them. Hoyu raised his hand. But wrong nonetheless, Khan continued. We'll still count your vote twice, though. Twice? We have to honor your commendedness somehow. This is what you get. I get 2 votes for a commendation? Khan held up 2 fingers. 2 votes on all class votes? Alden asked. Forever? Absolutely not, said Hoyu. Not unless I get extra. My mom has more than you. My grandfather has a commendation, Fabri announced. So I vote yes twice on wasabi. "Look what you did, Alden," said Khan. "Now we've got people thinking our tone and honors are genetically heritable." "No. One extra vote for Alden. For Wasabi." "That's all I get?" said Alden. "I was brave. The commendation even says so." "Listen." Khan tossed his t-shirt veil like it was long hair. "If you want more votes, get another commendation." "Don't make it too easy on him," said Hoyu. "Make him get a better commendation next time." By the time the group had finished debating the rules for commendation earners getting extra say in unimportant votes, Alden was dressed in his gym suit and feeling unexpectedly grateful toward his classmates. A couple of them hadn't joined in with the joking around, but there was no reason to read anything into that. "These guys are mostly good guys," he thought, following Ignacio out the door. The Meister was giving Soren a pep talk. Despite all the different dumbassery that goes on, Ignacio and Fabri both seemed to be driving Soren a little nuts. Apparently, they were still feeling guilty and trying to make up for the whole pressure-induced, self-burning incident. As of Monday's class, Soren hadn't managed to get the hang of his shaping, which they seemed to feel might be weighing on his mood. "I don't think complimenting him on his ability to glow is as nice as they think it is," Alden texted Lexi and Hoyu. "He's been able to glow since the first day." Lexi shook his head. "Why no brain text?" Hoyu demanded. He stared at Lexi. "Never brain text as much as me." "It's true," said Alden. "You don't." "I'm focusing on Rither. Mental texting can wait until I'm practicing in private so he never talks bad," Hoyu proclaimed, nodding at Alden. "That seems like a likely possibility," Alden agreed. Lexi rolled his eyes at them. "There's nothing wrong with mastering it in a less confusing way." Type word coward with cow part in angry font. Coward. Coward. There. Moo. Hoyu looked triumphant. Lexi looked unimpressed. "It's okay here on Anzidora. Better than okay a lot of the time." "Why were you guys shouting pickled ginger at us?" Astrid called from up ahead. "You were shouting wasabi at us," Khan called back. "Your favorite rice topping is ginger?" "What?" "No. It's spicy mayonnaise." "Weren't we shouting about sushi?" "I think it's been a good day." From talking with Portiloth in the elevator to deciding Chicago couldn't be a priority. From personal training at North of North to a kid with a can of peas to a spell cast correctly for the first time. To here. Now. Alden still had that raw, clear feeling that had accompanied him since this morning. Like he'd cut something away and it hurt, but he was moving better for it. Probably his time with Yenupez and having a straightforward goal was contributing as well. Principal Celeste said gym today might be rowdy. "Do you guys know why?" "No," said Hoyu, "but I will commit to being the rowdiest person in the whole." Does anyone else see my mom swinging my dad around like she's going to hammer throw him? Or is this a new version of that dream I had one time about? They'd entered the gym to the sight of a few unexpected adults, but before those adults could be examined, Hoyu's father was flying toward them, curling up like a human cannonball and then uncurling at the last second to smash his bare feet into the invisible barrier high over their heads that marked the boundary at the edge of the magic floor. He launched himself back toward his wife with his arms outstretched. He flew like a rocket, and they collided with a sound like boulders crashing together. Or maybe that was just Alden's imagination. Mrs. Zhangdemir didn't budge a centimeter, and they were both grinning so wide that Alden could tell even from this far away. "Hoyu," Khan whispered, nudging him with one elbow. "That's how you were, Ma. You can go there if you want to," Hoyu whispered back, "but I would single quote T. Your own parents are basically circus performers." Khan looked like he was considering the risk versus the reward. "Floor on," Vandy announced. In spite of the note of expectation in her voice, it took everyone else a few seconds to return the call, since they were all spreading out and surging forward to get a better view. Line of asterisks. The battle between Hoyu's parents only lasted a few minutes, just until the official start of class. It was too short for most viewers, but too long for Hoyu, who was trying to look unfazed while his father's interface name tag shifted through a variety of increasingly interesting names. From Omega Scorpio Zhang to things like Hoyu's favorite superhero and look, son, I'm upside down. Alden's personal favorite was I could kill a tank faster than anyone else in this room. Because it prompted Big Snake to hurl a metal pole right at Mr. Zhang Demir, and watching the pole bend around his raised forearm like the metal was soft modeling clay was a great visual aid to show the forces involved. It also made Alden curious about the pile of junk Big Snake was standing beside. He was watching the Zhang Demirs with instructor Klein, Vandy's mom, Galacors, and an Indian woman who Ignacio had run over to talk to as soon as he spotted her. She was his grandmother, according to February. When the demonstration was over, and it was time to join the instructors and visitors on the floor, they found out that the class was going to be a kind of obstacle course. But the obstacles, Instructor Waker said, will be all of us. Hoyu's father and Ignacio's grandmother looked convincingly murderous for a second before they both broke into broad smiles again. No time wasted today, Instructor Klein said in a clipped voice. Not even on instructions except for these few. Form teams of 5. Make it from that end of the gym. He nodded toward the locker rooms, and Alden looked behind him to see a black starting line appearing at the edge of the white floor. To that one. Klein gestured toward the opposite side of the gym. You can try anything you want to try and see where it gets you. What's the pain realism setting? Someone asked. Figure it out as you go. Do we attack the other teams, or? Figure that out, too. Tell them about the pizza party, Instructor Waker said. You have today's class and Fridays to get across the floor one time, said Klein. This is thanks to the generosity of these current and former heroes. We've had a record number of family members and alumni volunteering their help since the disaster, and we're getting organized to make sure none of you missed out on the benefits of their experience and support. Anyone who succeeds by the end of class Friday can have a personal lesson here in the gym with the volunteer of their choice. There's a list of available heroes and faculty members, with their schedules. It was hard to hear what he was saying over the burst of excited voices and Masha shouting, how long do we get to fight them for, and do we get the whole gym or just a block? Klein was uncommonly patient with the outburst, but his tone was also amusingly severe as he added, and regardless of your success, there will be a pizza party picnic at the track on Friday after class. Attendance is optional. We're sorry your class dinner ended on such a bad note. Now, form your teams. Told continued.